Dr. Gabrielle Lyon, welcome to the Meat Mafia podcast.
I love it that I'm here, and the name Meat Mafia makes me think I have a sense of what we're going to talk about.
Oh, yeah.
And you're from New York, too. So mafia culture, it's very fitting.
Yeah,
right?
I'm here. I'm ready for it. Thank you guys so much.
Yeah, we were saying, it's for us on the show, it's always cool to get connected with people where we've really gotten value out of their content too. And what I was saying, Harry and I, what we both love about you is your ability to take these very complex topics and make it very simple and applicable and kind of give people positive solutions as well. So we think that there's not as much of that in the health space as there should be. And you're a perfect testament to that. So we appreciate you, number one. But secondly, just for our listeners, we would love to just learn a little bit more about your backstory around health. What was kind of like your red pill moment that the things that they teach you in traditional medicine maybe aren't best for longevity and optimal human performance? I think that'd be a great starting point.
Yeah, I'm so excited to be able to talk about my background. I actually had a little bit of a different trajectory. I think a lot of physicians or healthcare providers come into this space because of a challenge that they went through versus being indoctrinated from a very young age. And I graduated high school in 3.5 years, and I moved to Hawaii, of all places. Kauai, which if you've never been, is the Garden Isle is so beautiful. And I moved in with my godmother, and her name is Elizabeth Lipsky. For anyone that is in the functional medicine space, she is one of the OGs.
Wow.
The group before Mark Hyman, really the older generation, and she was a trailblazer and is a trailblazer. She is a nutritional PhD. So living with her, working for room and board, I just sat in with patients. What else am I going to do? The kids are at school. Hawaii is beautiful. Just listening and learning and seeing the impact of nutrition on people's lives. From cancer patients to individuals suffering from, you name it, GI diseases, anything, etc. I became fascinated. And I believed at that moment, over that period of time at 17, that nutrition was the way to go. And that was the way of the future. Shortly after that, I went to do my undergraduate in nutritional sciences, vitamin, mineral, metabolism. And I went to the University of Illinois. Have you guys been to Illinois?
I've driven through. I've been to Chicago.
Exactly. You've driven through. And what you will find in Illinois, that there are lots of cornfields and potentially tornadoes. There was a moment, and we were sitting in nutrition class where there was a tornado warning. And we all had to go out down into this fallout shelter. And I swear to you, it felt like we were there for 3 hours.
Jeez.
And here I am sitting in a room full of other individuals in a nutrition class, because that was where we were, thinking to myself, I am completely and totally useless right now. There could be a massive emergency, and my response would be, here, have an apple. And it was at that moment I realized I wanted to go to medical school. To make a long story not longer, went to medical school, did 2 years of psychiatry residency at the University of Louisville. And then I did 3 years of family medicine in New York. And then I did a fellowship in nutritional sciences, obesity medicine, and geriatrics at WashU in St. Louis. And you asked for this aha moment where potentially things weren't going the way that I felt that they should be in medicine. I would say that nearly all physicians will tell you that the way Western medicine is that it is a symptomology approach. You are treating symptoms, and we need to treat symptoms because the root cause maybe remains elusive or is difficult or challenging and busy. I know that you both have probably had your own health challenges, and you went to seek health, you were met with, well, we don't know exactly what to tell you to do, but what we can tell you to do is take this medication, follow these protocols. During my time in fellowship, and I will tell you, I did not actually want to do a fellowship in geriatrics. I was forced to do a fellowship in geriatrics because it was part of the deal. For the listener, in order to do a fellowship, you have to have that funding paid for, meaning you have to do work within the hospital. And that deal for me was to become a geriatric fellow in order to do my nutritional science training. And we were working on a study that was looking at obesity and brain function. I absolutely fell in love with one of the participants. She was a mom of 3 in her mid-50s. She just had this big, boisterous energy. And she had struggled with the last 20 pounds for the last 20 years. And we imaged her brain, and her brain looked like the beginning of an Alzheimer's brain.
Mm.
And have you guys ever been to a nursing home?
Once.
Yeah, I have.
Did that one time affect you?
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, seeing the quality of life there is like, you can't really get the image out of your head.
You cannot. And we don't see that on a routine basis. We are very disconnected from and to end of life. Even right now, you guys are young and healthy. And I would say arguably the listener is very disconnected to what the end of life looks like.
Mm-hmm.
And especially in our society, we do not talk about death and dying. We talk about life. We don't think about what is the end really like.
Mm.
And in a geriatric training program, you are seeing end of life routinely, whether it's being at the bedside of patients that have 3 months to live, whether it's being at the bedside of individuals that have 3 hours to live. You never forget that. And after you're seeing patient after patient, it becomes an image and an experience that one never forgets.
Mm.
So looking at her brain, I realized where she was going. And of course, I felt responsible. Even though I had just met her, I felt as a physician, we had been telling her the general advice, which was exercise more, reduce your calories, and go through these processes of yo-yo dieting.
Mm-hmm.
And in the process, it absolutely destroyed her metabolism. It destroyed her muscle. And I just couldn't get the image out of my head as to where she was going to go.
Mm.
Would she remember her children's names? Would she be able to take care of her activities of daily living? And it was at that moment that I realized that the one thing that people had in common wasn't that they were over fat. It wasn't fat as the issue. It was this idea that they were all under muscled or had unhealthy skeletal muscle.
Mm-hmm.
And that's where this concept that I created of muscle-centric medicine was born.
Mm.
It was to really focus on skeletal muscle, not from a training perspective. I think the physical fitness world does that great. I think the sports world does that great. But actually, from a medical perspective, leveraging skeletal muscle as this organ of longevity for health and wellness beyond being fit, beyond looking good naked.
Mm-hmm.
And here we are.
There's so much to unpack there.
I know there's so much good stuff that you just said.
I would love to understand like just the nature of your relationship with Elizabeth and what seeds she planted that helped you start to reframe things when you were going through the legacy medical system. Because I'm sure you ran into so many things where like, why are we doing things this way, after having learned to appreciate some alternative way of thinking around nutrition?
I have been on, I would say hundreds of podcasts. Nobody has ever asked me that question, Harry.
Really?
Let's go, Harry.
Nobody has ever asked me that question. And so this is great. I never have an opportunity to talk about it. I would say I probably cried more in medical school and residency than I have ever done in my entire collective life.
Really?
When I went to medical school, I absolutely hated it. I hated what I was learning. I hated the way in which the information was provided. It is extremely rigorous, and the quality of life as a medical student, as a resident, we were chatting before the show, my husband works 100 hours a week. This is not the way to set up individuals to care for other people's health.
Right.
If, it's like when you tell a kid, it's don't do what I do what I say.
Yes.
Yeah.
But it shouldn't be that way.
No.
It should be that you do what I do because I am an example and I can embody the information that I'm giving you.
Mm-hmm.
Right.
I absolutely struggled with the conventional way in which medicine was taught and administered. There are 40 million people easily on statin drugs. Right?
40
Crazy.
million.
Yeah.
And it's there's no real trend markers to show that that's going to like course correct.
I mean, some people need them, but some people don't. And I would say there are many, many, many people that likely do not need statins yet are placed on them. We have to think, what are the long-term implications of the actions that we're taking?
Yeah.
And who is ultimately responsible? So as physicians, there's standards of care that you are supposed to meet. If a patient does not meet lowering their, for example, hemoglobin A1C, then you will institute a medication versus a physician being trained in how do we actually address skeletal muscle? How do we actually address nutritional science so that we can move the lever for people? I really struggled with it for a long time. And in fact, there was a time where I debated even going to residency.
Wow.
Because your background is so unique where it's like, it's not like you're going into medical school blind. You basically had like the ultimate like nutritional internship with your godmother at 17 years old. So you kind of have an idea of what you want to do. And then you're going to medical school and you're like, yeah, but what they're teaching me doesn't really match up with what I ultimately want to do. I imagine maybe that was some of the conflict as well.
Yeah. And I want to say that understanding, in order to become an expert in anything, you do have to go through the necessary steps that are painful to get a breadth of knowledge of what is happening. You cannot truly master a craft without going through the rigors of what that craft asks of you. Is that fair to say?
Absolutely.
Yeah, definitely.
Which is why I went through medical school, because in order to appreciate the impact of all these things that I talk about now, if I had skipped that part, then it would be almost as if I wouldn't know what I didn't know. And I think that we see that in the influencer world and individuals that speak on certain topics, that they don't necessarily know what they don't know and how that actually stands up in clinical practice.
Yeah.
But yes, it was a tremendous challenge. And I knew that the only way to move the needle for people was to do it this way, at least for me.
Yeah.
Right.
At least for me. And also, medicine is great. You know, I mentioned my husband was a SEAL for a decade and now is a surgeon. We need that. We need medical interventions.
Right.
And we need a much more aggressive way of lifestyle management.
Definitely. What was the name of the geriatric patient that you said that you fell in love with?
Yeah, we'll just call her Betty.
Betty. I'm fascinated just by your experience on death, because like you had said, before you asked that question, I was like, maybe I've been exposed to a nursing home once and it had a really profound impact, but that was all I've really been exposed to people in that chapter of their life. I'm just curious for you, for someone that was exposed to death and dealing with a lot of people in that final chapter of their lives, what were just some of the key reflections or takeaways that you had maybe about, you know, health with your patients, but also just like yourself and maybe like just your potential and the way that you were living your life up to that point?
Yeah. Life is short. Life is short, and we are very distractible. And we are distracted by things that don't matter much, and they replace the things that potentially matter most. And even now, I think a lot about social media, and I think a lot about the use of our devices. And it's not that they're a problem. And I used to think that they were a problem, the devices, social media, that this was the problem. If you were to take a step back, we are actually the problem. We are the distractible ones. And the question becomes, can we sit with discomfort? And one of the biggest things, and I use that as an example because I would love the listener to think about, what is it that they are replacing? What is the discomfort that they are really working on replacing? One thing is for certain, nobody gets out alive. And we all have a time. Of course, we don't know when that is. And the way in which we live our life will allow us to courageously face that time. But if we don't live actively, then death becomes much more foreboding and scary.
Yeah.
And I think regret, I think at the end of life, the biggest thing that you hear people talk about is the regret that they have had. Spending time with friends and family.
One of the things that I can't help but think about is just like this idea of outsourcing our responsibility, whether it's outsourcing our responsibility for our health, which is probably something you felt like Elizabeth taught to you, which is like nutrition. Like we as people should know how to fuel ourselves for a healthy life, or outsourcing the responsibility of like taking care of your parents into later ages of life. So you actually have some intimacy with the last few days. And we've just outsourced these very important aspects of life to other people. And I feel like that's kind of the root of all evil, where it's like, we just don't want to take accountability for certain things. And these things are actually our lifeblood. Like what we put in our body is going to fuel that great life. How we take care of somebody else, like, is kind of reciprocity, like you were saying before the show, like you can only hope that someone's there for you in your later stages of life.
Yeah.
I think about like that with even my own parents. It's like, I want to be there. I don't want to just like give that away to somebody, give that responsibility away to somebody else.
Yeah.
Cause like my mom did that for her mom, and like it's an important step. So I'm just curious, like that idea of like outsourcing responsibility seems like something that's very like prevalent in everything that you're talking about.
Yeah, I think it becomes a challenge because as anyone that has ever had an aging parent, it's very difficult. And the culture here is isolated.
Mm-hmm.
It has to be a community thing. And which is why I love the Meat Mafia. You guys have a community.
Yeah.
And the more community you have, the better you can withstand what life has to throw at you. It's not a if, it's a when.
It's a when.
Totally.
And you have to have your teammates. Your teammates can be blood, your teammates can be relationships, but you have to be able to be in the foxhole with people who have your back and whose back that you have, and you are willing to step up and be there for them. But it is not an isolated moment.
Mm-hmm.
You know, it can't just be Harry's your best friend, so you just have Harry.
Mm-hmm.
Totally.
It has to be how do we create a community of like-minded individuals with values that align, that have integrity and honor and discipline and resilience, all the things that I value.
Mm-hmm.
And that's how we survive impact with the outside world.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, it's interesting. It just seems super counterintuitive to like take your elders or the loved ones or the people that have like all this rich wisdom that tribes typically will like prize and live with the elders, and we just kind of outsource it and just put it into a nursing home. And I had a pretty interesting experience because my girlfriend's grandmother passed away like 2 months ago. Really long life, 89. She had like a 4-year battle with lymphoma. And when they told her that she was going to put her on hospice, it was like the whole family just kind of flooded around her. So it was like her 3 kids, 13 grandkids, couple great grandkids. And it was interesting because it was this really sad event, but at the same time, it really brought the entire family closer together. And they gave her like this amazing kind of send off as she like, went on to her next life. And it just made me think about like, that's really how we should be thinking about, transitioning people and being there for them in the last days of their life. And I'm sure you saw like the downsides to that, but I'm sure you also probably learned an amazing perspective for you with your family, like how you want to be there and really show up for them too.
It was probably my most valuable training. And I've done a lot, unfortunately, a lot of training, which I don't recommend anybody doing unless you want to be in school for like 17 years. And the center of the earth might even become cooler by the time you finish all your training. The most valuable training that I ever received wasn't my nutrition training, wasn't the training from seeing these high-level researchers or how to run a study or how to do a clamp or a muscle biopsy. The most valuable aspect of my training was seeing death on a routine basis. And it is so profound because death is not necessarily about the end. It's about how you live courageously in the middle. And that in and of itself was just so profound. And listen, you can talk to the warriors of our culture. And again, we are a military family, and, the warriors, the military operators, I think they have a really good perspective on death. They're ready. Listen, I'm not saying that for everybody, so don't get mad at me. But again, the operators that I interface with, it's not something that they're afraid of. And it's part of the job description. But I would say for the rest of us who haven't gone to war or are not faced with that, we have to be able to live courageously. And in order to do that, I think there's a tremendous amount of discomfort in the moment of being deeply present about the decisions that you are making, whether it is food, whether it is what you are saying, whether it is how you are spending your time. And the more we can bring that into focus, especially with all of these distractions, I feel like the quality of our life is going to be better.
Yeah. Gabrielle, you'd mentioned with patient Betty that you had noticed some early patterns in the brain imaging of Alzheimer's. Were you able to reverse any of those symptoms? It was too late for her.
No. And she didn't have overt symptoms. Maybe there was some small cognitive deficits. But one of the things that we see is that, again, the brain is an organ, and body composition is directly related to many of these diseases that we talk about, that we think about as the trajectory of aging. What are those diseases? Well, if you look at the CDC, what are the I'm gonna blow your mind for a second, because I've spent a lot of time thinking about this, and I put this in my book. If you look at what the CDC says the top reasons of death are: morbidity, mortality. You're looking at heart disease. You're looking at Alzheimer's disease. You're looking at cancer, kidney disease, diabetes is on there. Nowhere on there is obesity. Nowhere on there is sarcopenia or loss of skeletal muscle, which is arguably at the root of many of these challenges, or death from these illnesses.
Yeah.
And it became fascinating to think about how we think about these illnesses. We think that they are something out there, that we age and then you get Alzheimer's, or you age and the longer you're alive, the higher the likelihood of getting cancer or kidney disease or diabetes. But these are diseases, many of which begin in midlife, 30. Cardiovascular disease doesn't just happen.
Right.
It's not like being pregnant. You either are or you're not. It's kind of like this, right? This like slow progression over time. And the brain, these challenges with cognitive impairment begin midlife. And they are directly related. Again, there's a genetic component of Alzheimer's, but this is directly related to body composition. We saw that the wider the waistline, the lower the brain volume. Lower brain volume, as you can imagine, is not good for a number of things, including memory, executive function. And if we really care about the way in which we age, we have to care when we're younger.
Yeah.
And again, I think that that's why you guys are doing such a great job, because you're caring about it when you're younger.
Yeah, we appreciate it. And also too, it's a matter of what you were saying before, trying to build community around it and make it cool. Like there's so many things as a 20-year-old that can distract you from being a healthy person. It's all the exciting things like going out on the weekends and being social, which for most 20-year-olds is like going out 2 or 3 times, drinking, not taking care of yourself the next day, and you're setting yourself up to just be on that hamster wheel of being unhealthy. So like, how can you actually make it fun and enjoyable too?
Totally.
It's not like, oh, like being healthy is like, you're just like the odd duck and you're kind of the outcast.
Yeah, and think about it. Think about the habits that we create when we're younger. And you see this. So you know people that are 10 or 20 years older than you, right?
Yes.
Yeah.
And you still see them trying to either course correct habits that they have had for 10 to 20 years.
Yep.
Right?
Definitely.
If we can nail the habits earlier, you don't have to spend a lifetime trying to rework the architecture of your life and your habits.
Yeah, the amount of mental strain that goes into trying to fix these things over a long period of time, if you don't course correct early on, is, I mean,
hard pass.
Like that's I can't even think about how much mental strain goes into that. It's so stressful too, like living with that, trying to, manage all of the other things that life is going to throw at you. And then you're also trying to like course correct for your health.
Yeah.
It should be the source of your
I hear
energy.
Again, I've been seeing patients for over 15 years, and people will say, well, I don't have time to work out, to cook, to do X, Y, and Z. And in my mind, I think, if you don't have time to do those things, do you know how much time it takes to be sick?
Yeah. What else are you doing?
If you don't have time for health, then you are definitely not going to have time for illness. And this is where, when you are younger, how old is your average listener?
Probably anywhere from late 20s to early 30s.
Perfect.
Yep.
Strike while the iron is hot. These diseases of aging are not happening out here. When you are younger, you are primed for muscle health. Muscle is the organ of longevity. When you are in your 20s and 30s, this is your prime muscle building focus. And everyone's thinking, I know that I do CrossFit, but it's not from that perspective. If we think about it, how do we safeguard against aging? How do we become strong and capable to show up in the best way possible for our lives and really create a positive environment and an impact on the world? Skeletal muscle is so much more than that. It is, obviously, everybody thinks about skeletal muscle as being jacked and tan, but it's this metabolic organ. It's your metabolic sink. It's your amino acid reservoir. It's your site for myokine production. That these are hormones that interface with everything. Not to mention, if you do get injured, I'm sure you both played baseball, right?
Yes.
Yep.
Did either of you get injured?
Definitely.
Yeah, absolutely.
Did you have to stop training or put a body part in a sling at any point?
Yeah, I dislocated my knee. Yeah, it was brutal.
So
how we met.
you totally you overachieved.
Yeah.
And after a period of time, you see that there's atrophy.
Yes, absolutely.
And this is the time where you have the capacity to build that reservoir
Mm-hmm.
for when that happens, because that's actually how aging happens. It's these series of catabolic crises. That would be considered a catabolic crisis.
Mm-hmm.
But one, because you're young and healthy and had your nutrition dialed in, that you were able to overcome.
Exactly.
But the older and more mature you get, if you are not as physically capable, then the downstream effect of losing that skeletal muscle, never being able to go back to baseline, will affect insulin sensitivity, will affect glucose, will affect potentially triglycerides, and a whole host of things that create a ton of issues. And there's one more thing. Probably the most important thing is that who you have to become to develop skeletal muscle is a disciplined, driven human.
Mm-hmm.
Absolutely.
And that's amazing.
Yes. That's something that a lot of people overlook too. Harry and I have been exploring this concept a lot on the show. Like if we talk about hormone health, for a guy, it's very easy to just be like, oh, I want to get my, total testosterone to 800 or 1,000 or whatever the number is. And it's like, we focus on the number instead of looking at it as like, if you get it to that number, it's a gateway to becoming a better version of yourself,
Absolutely.
a different person.
Absolutely. Muscle is currency.
Yes.
It is your health currency. It is the pinnacle. But when we think about currency, it is the only currency that you cannot pay for. You can't bargain. You can't sell it. You 100% of the time have to earn it.
Yeah.
It's also it seems like the concept of muscle building or reclaiming your health, it's a very fair pursuit. It's like you bring up the college baseball analogy, like, you can work as hard as you want, but someone might be more talented than you. You could train, to be great at a corporate sales role, but someone just outperforms you or they know the boss. It's like, it seems like muscle building and vitality and reclaiming your health is one of those things where if you make the investment, like almost anyone could, get those ideal levels. Do you think that that's true?
Yes, I do. And people will say, oh, are there potentially non-responders? I mean, we probably all have a skeletal muscle mass cap.
Yes.
Yeah.
I don't think that we know how much muscle mass would be ideal for an individual, again, because the models are really based on sickness or averages. And we know that the average population really isn't that healthy. But it is all about the effort to reach a particular potential.
Yeah.
Yeah.
It's not necessarily knowing exactly what that potential is.
Right.
And of course, I will say, though, I like to see improvements. If you set a standard for yourself, not a goal, but if you set a standard for how you're going to go through life, I would like to see progression. I would like to see if you are doing X number of squat, that this is the weight that you are in some way improving, because life is definitely about how do you continue to get better at things.
Yeah.
What are some of the common arguments that you hear people say back? Like whether it's like, oh, I'm a slow gainer, so I can't put muscle on, or like, oh, I don't want to get too, like from a female perspective.
Number one, you nailed
I don't
it.
wanna get jacked.
Number one,
Like-
that is the number one thing that people say. I am afraid to get bulky.
Yeah. And one of the things that Michael Bostic said when you were on his podcast, he was like, do you know how hard it actually is to get jacked?
Yes,
Like-
I've been trying for a very long time.
know.
And for God's sakes, I'm still 5'1", 110 pounds.
Yeah.
And I've been training for 2 decades. At least 2 decades. I will let you know when that works.
Yeah.
But so many women they're like, oh, if I touch weights or if I touch a barbell or do squatting or deadlifting, like I'm going to get really bulky.
So here's the question. The question is that a true belief, or is that purely a distraction because they have a tremendous amount of fear or discomfort of going into the weight room and doing something new?
Yeah.
If you walk into a gym, the majority of cardio equipment is fully maintained by women, right? And I'm a
100%,
woman. I can
definitely.
say that every time I go in, it's a 95% women.
Definitely.
The majority of the weight room is a bunch of dudes texting on the phone, being super annoying, smelling and sweating everywhere. But that's true. If you were to say, what is the percentage of women that are doing cardiovascular activity versus the women that are squatting or deadlifting, wall slams, any of those things,
Yeah.
it's mostly men.
Yeah.
So therein lies the question, is this, here's the other thing I think that in the fitness and just the realm at which we exist, is the more something is repeated, the more it's believed to be true.
Definitely. There's so many false beliefs out there that it's just like, where did you hear that? That like you're going to get bulky as a woman lifting weights. Like who told you that? Because it's
why do you, and the question is, do you actually believe that? Or is there this unconscious reaction of this is just a statement that I make?
Yeah. And also they're looking in the wrong places. Like guys will look at like bodybuilding.com and be like, oh sweet, like
I got that.
like I want to look like that guy. And then girls will look at bodybuilding.com and be like, I don't want to look like that girl because she's too bulky. Little do they not know they're both on steroids. They're both not doing things that are even remotely close to like a healthy training style for a normal person. So it's interesting. I think there's a lot of these like false beliefs.
Yeah.
But one of the things I really liked about, like, I was reading through your website and you were talking about the barriers, the mental barriers that people run into when it comes to actually like creating change. And I think that's kind of like the layer deeper that a lot of people don't want to press into. Like there's all this information out there that literally anyone can come across any day of the week if you Google or just like come across the right people to tell you the information. The information is out there, but it's actually, how do you break through the barrier to create the change and make things happen?
Yeah, you have to go right to the heart.
Yeah.
And I would say a mental framework for that is, do you feel worthy? Do you feel worthy of having the health and the body that you want? And you would be surprised at how many people don't feel worthy of actually having that thing.
Yeah.
And that is translatable. You see people that struggle with money or people that struggle with relationships. And at the end of the day, is it because there is a real struggle with the relationship? Or is it because they don't feel worthy of being loved? Or they don't feel worthy of having financial success? What are the underlying narratives that we could say are potentially monologues? But there is a worthiness threshold that people will only go up to a level they feel worthwhile of obtaining, and or they will sabotage themselves to get back down to that set point. The question becomes, how do you raise that personal set point? And that is something pretty important. I will tell you this. Being a physician, you see thousands and thousands of people. Being a good physician, you should be able to recognize disease patterns, illness patterns, right? That's what you expect when you go to your doctor. Being an effective physician is something totally different. Being an effective physician or healthcare provider is being able to recognize patterns of people and pushing into those patterns of people to get the best out of themselves and using medicine as the modality to do it. And that is incredible.
That is incredible. I was actually going to, you kind of answered my next question. I was going to ask you, what does the ideal like physician-patient relationship look like? So it sounds like part of it is as—
Dude, that is your wingman.
Yeah.
No, and I actually don't see that. I mean, it's like that in my practice. So I still see patients.
Yeah. So you're saying the physician is like the patient's wingman?
Yeah.
Yeah.
You guys are homies. Like, that is your go-to person. You need to have a regular wife, a work wife, and a medical wife.
Yeah.
And that's your wingman. Because it's not that, again, a physician in my mind is a guide. They are your sounding board to just not just look at your blood levels, but to actually know what is going on in your life. Nothing is more important. I mean, I suppose maybe you're a tax guy, but your relationship with your physician is not something that is interchangeable or exchangeable. And I don't see the relationships in a place where they should be.
Yeah.
And people don't think about that. You should be able to call your doctor when shit hits the fan, no matter what it is.
Yeah. And the reason why I was asking that is that in 2019, when I think it was 24 or 25, when I decided, I have UC, I don't want to be on these drugs anymore. I think that I could heal this holistically. It was, in some ways I had a lot of nerves around it just because my GI, who was a great guy, he didn't know how to take me through that holistic path. So he wasn't really giving me any guidance. And I had some confidence because I was like, I'm listening to other doctors and people that are going on shows and saying, hey, I had Crohn's colitis. I was healing it by going carnivore. So I kind of lead into the power of the anecdote. But I do remember thinking like, how much better would it have been if I had a physician that could kind of help give me the playbook a little bit?
Or at least be up there to call, right?
Definitely.
You know, with my patients, I'm calling other providers. Hey, so you're seeing this guy. So what's the plan? Let me know. And how do we figure out what needs to happen from either a surgical or interventional standpoint? But you do need a physician that I think really knows what's happening in your life and truly gives a shit.
Yeah.
Like that person, you can call them at any point in time. And I will say there has to be a match. You have to find a physician that is also going to call you out on your bullshit, that is not going to let you perform to a level lower than you are capable of.
Yeah.
And I think it's really important. Again, I don't think anyone's ever asked me, what should that relationship be? And that is one of the reasons why I still see patients. I still have a concierge clinic. I mean, I have other providers, but there is something, it's a great privilege to be a provider because you really can help people get the best version out of themselves in a way that is personal, and it has this ripple effect.
Yeah.
Right? My practice is full of mavericks and game changers and people that make the world a better place.
Yes.
My job is to make sure that those guys are just functioning on all cylinders. What a privilege.
Yeah.
That is such a privilege.
It's amazing. And you can impact so many lives just through having that effect.
Totally.
I'm curious what your opinion is on just mistakes in terms of like the approach from the physician side in terms of being the best resource for your patients. Like, I'm sure that like, just like any profession, there's bad physicians, there's great physicians. So what is the best version of this model that we're talking about where people can really feel comfortable, like in Brett's scenario, going to their physician and be like, I really don't want to be on these drugs. I want to figure out a path forward that's more holistic. Like, what's the right framework for these physicians to...
Well, for Brett, it was unique because he had ulcerative colitis. So you do need a GI doctor on board. One of the most important aspects, and number one, I think it's really important to state that physicians, I think, are amazing. The profession is amazing. The amount of schooling that one has to go through, the amount of board certifications, the amount of testing, the standard, it is highly, highly regulated. And that's incredible, right? And there is a standard of practice that needs to be met, and the expectation is there. So having an individual that is trained in the area of expertise is essential.
Yeah.
And any good physician is going to know where their limitations are, and then bring on board and cultivate a team. Having, what would have been ideal is, again, you have an individual that is a subject matter expert, and then you bring on other people that is their wheelhouse. And that's how that goes.
Yeah.
I really loved the mental framework that you had when you were describing your patients as like these mavericks that are out there, like benefiting the economy, like building these incredible businesses, building families. Like, I feel like most people don't take inventory of their own health the same way. Like, instead of just being like, hey, Brett wants to get healthy because he wants to be jacked or whatever it is. It's like,
and tan, right? And have good hair.
And look
at that's all. That's all anyone
and
cares about. Good hair.
Yeah. But it's like, but what about like the business that you're able to create, the way you show up as a dad or a husband, or like the person that you're going to become in that process? Like health, I feel like we need to almost have this mental model of like your health has like these dire stakes to them. And I feel like you have that responsibility as a physician, and it's like you need your patient to have that too.
Yeah, I actually speak to a lot of entrepreneurial groups. So I take care of a lot of entrepreneurial patients. Really, that's kind of my wheelhouse, is more of the aggressive type A kind of individual. I'm sure that comes as a shock to both of you.
It's such a shock, yeah.
And one of the things that I see taking care of some of the most effective entrepreneurs in the world is that the guys at the top, they get it. They are not making the rookie mistakes that individuals who are just coming into the entrepreneurial world, that are burning themselves out and having this, the business is going like this, and every 6 weeks after a launch or a big show or X, Y, and Z, that their health is crashing.
Right.
And then they're shocked every time that it happens. Humans are predictable. actions and weaknesses, they are all predictable. The best entrepreneurs, and I take care of some of the best, they all know their weaknesses, their nutrition, their training, their sleep, that is all dialed in. It is not left up to chance.
Mm-hmm.
I could call Bedros Keuilian and I could say, hey, B, what did you have for lunch 2 weeks ago? Do you think he'd be able to tell me?
Yeah.
You better believe he'd be able to tell me.
It doesn't do the chicken Caesar salad every single day or something like that.
Exactly.
Right? Yeah.
And then some days he might have his 4 eggs and chicken breast, his protein power lunch.
Yeah.
I know exactly what he's having for dinner.
So for
or
someone,
lunch.
for someone listening
Yeah.
who's thinking, well, that sounds kind of boring, or like that lifestyle sounds boring. I would rather have this like abundance, this variety. How do you break through to them? Because for me, it's like, okay, you can't really have your cake and eat it too. You can't be this person who wants the lifestyle of Bedros, who's high performing, doing all these amazing things, and be the person who's sitting on their couch, like, enjoying all these different types of, foods, and going to bed at midnight.
Yeah. Are you ready for it?
Yeah.
You are not allowed to complain about the results that you didn't get
Mm-hmm.
from the actions and the behaviors that you didn't take.
Mm-hmm. I love it.
That's it.
Yeah.
That's it. I'm going to tell you what else is really important is you have to know your weaknesses.
Yeah.
I do not care about strengths. Everyone talks about, okay, well, what are your strengths? Who cares? Know where you fall short.
Yeah.
And the best entrepreneurs and, what I see over time is that the highest level a person's business is ever going to go has one common denominator. It's not money. It's not time. Do you know what it is?
Identifying where you slip up and fall short.
Health. Baseline common denominator is health. Not money, not time, etc. Health is the thing that has to be protected and leveraged and optimized if you are looking for bigger goals and you are looking for a better life. It doesn't start with anything. It doesn't start with more money. It doesn't start with more time. The capacity of the expansion of the human begins with the human.
Mm-hmm.
And understanding that, I'm going to give you an example that I think is really practical and something that I teach a lot of the entrepreneurs is that we are all shocked. Right? Have you guys ever done a massive event?
Yeah.
Like a speaking event?
Anything.
Yes.
Where you just were so hyped up that you were like, oh my God, I am so hyped up right now. I think I'm going to throw up or like pee myself. Just so hyped up.
Yes.
After the event, completely depleted, marginally depressed even.
Yes.
Yeah.
And you're seeing this, like you can think about this, maybe at that moment doing risk-taking behaviors like what's the next thing? What am I going to buy? What am I going to eat? What am I, you have a girlfriend now, but like who's the next girl? Have you guys all, we'll take the girlfriend now. I don't want to get anyone in trouble, but have you had an experience like that?
After we did the Ironman, we did Ironman Waco and we trained for it all year. We did it. The 2 days after, we were literally just like moping around our house. We were like,
both of you.
I literally was like, I've never felt depressed in my life. I'm like, I literally feel depressed the day after the event. Yeah.
That is so predictable. I could have told you that was coming a mile away.
Yeah.
A mile away. As high as someone goes is as low as they go. There's no baseline.
Yeah.
Whether it's a dopamine depletion, potentially that's what it is. As high as you go, at that peak, that pinnacle, that is your place of vulnerability.
Mm-hmm.
If you cannot modulate that affect, if you cannot modulate that excitement, you better believe that you will pay for it on the back end because you will go as equally as low, if not lower, than that experience.
Mm.
And that is predictable. And this is the time where a novice entrepreneur or someone who isn't aware of that, you don't have to be an entrepreneur to experience that. You can run an Ironman. It sounds a little crazy, but you could totally do it. At that low is where you're vulnerable.
Yeah.
That's when you make bad decisions. That's potentially you will go off your nutrition plan. You guys might not, but maybe you sit on the couch for the next 6 months because you cannot get back up to baseline quickly.
Mm-hmm.
So the first step is understanding that you have to mitigate that excitement, have to have a neutral mind. This is the unfortunate part that I did psychiatry for 2 years.
Yeah.
I was very interested in the way that the mind worked because I thought that that was the underpinning of everything. And I'm very grateful for my psychiatry training because it teaches you how to think about certain ways and a framework of thinking. You have to mitigate going into that. If you guys had kind of mitigated the excitement of it and the meaning of it, you probably wouldn't have crashed as bad.
100%.
Definitely. Yeah, there's something to like the novelty of it being like the first big race where we're like extending ourselves and thinking that it's like this insurmountable thing.
No way.
And it was, I mean, it was hard, but you know, on the other side of that, you look back, you're like, oh, like if I was asked to do that again, I wouldn't be as worked up about it and all the different emotions that you were feeling.
Totally. So I have this book coming out, right? This book with Simon & Schuster. I'm a first-time author. It's like this big thing, Forever Strong. Took 2 years to write, 2 kids later. You know, it's like this whole thing.
That's a great name, by the way.
Thank you. Yeah. Forever Strong. We went back and forth. And you would think, right, it's coming out, I don't know when this podcast is coming out, but it comes out October 17th.
Nice.
You would think I would be so amped, right? Like, so amped. I did a TEDx, which was the second most viewed TEDx talk in the world in May.
Nice.
Right? Even though they flagged it. They flagged it for being outside of guidelines because my science was controversial, even though it was 8 minutes, maybe 10, with 52 different references. You know, I mean.
How many downloads did it have or listens?
So I think it's 600,000 now. It hasn't been out that long, but it is on a pretty good trajectory because they flagged it so they wouldn't promote it.
So you'd definitely be over 1 million if it wasn't flagged.
So it was flagged.
TEDx
flagged it, not promoted it, because I called it the midlife muscle crisis. Everything that you thought you knew about obesity is wrong.
Yeah.
That we don't really have an obesity epidemic, but what we have is a midlife muscle crisis. And that we need to be stronger and more resilient. We need to train hard and we need to eat dietary protein. And none of this is shocking, right?
Yeah.
No.
But this is a flagged talk that they did not and will not promote.
Wow.
So I encourage every listener to go on there and listen to my super controversial talk.
Yeah. But they let like fear porn just like permeate and continue to be spun up out there. It's crazy.
Are you kidding? And then they promoted, I remember seeing the talks that they were promoting, and it was how animal agriculture was killing the planet and that we should move to more processed meats and all this other stuff. So it was just, whatever.
It's remarkable.
But I forgot what I wanted to tie a bow on.
I think
what
I know
was
what
telling
it is.
you.
So you touched on the concept of a neutral mindset and how if we had a neutral mindset, it would have helped us.
Oh, yeah,
No one knows what a neutral mindset is. Could you maybe explain that and then put the bow on what you were saying?
So here's the thing. You would think I would be so pumped about this book coming out, but I know that the more excitement and the more pressure I put on it and, oh my God, it's this big thing. If as high as I'm going to go, I know that if I allow myself to get there, it's going to completely take me out. I'm going to be totally ineffective for however long.
Yeah.
Right.
No chance. Neutral. Everyone's like, oh, your book's come out. It's so cool. I've already moved on to the next 2 projects. Right? You move on. It's neutral. Do we celebrate it? Sometimes I celebrate great things. Sometimes I don't. How do you preserve kind of this dopamine experience? Is you don't celebrate everything. You know, we're in this culture where, oh my gosh, this is so great. Let's celebrate all this stuff. No. Do something great. Don't celebrate it.
Yeah.
Neutral. Be neutral.
It makes me think that falling in love with the process, it's like this idea of falling in love with the process, so cliche, but falling in love with the process is so much more important than where you end up or like the thing you end up doing. Because when you do love the process, you actually like being in the weeds of putting the pages together and tying the thoughts together so much more than the release date when you're going and like actually seeing people interact with your book.
Maybe. I think sometimes the process is freaking brutal.
Yeah.
This is brutal. It's not fun.
Yeah.
Right? There are so many processes and things that I do. It's not fun. And it is a total drag. But the ultimate outcome, I think how we have to really position ourselves is who is the person that we want to be?
Yeah.
Not who, I guess I shouldn't say that, is what do we want to become?
Yes.
How do we want to cultivate ourselves? You know, I was telling you how disappointed I was. I have a podcast called the Dr. Gabrielle Lyon Show. And I was really excited to bring on one of the first 3 female Ranger graduates.
So badass.
At 37 years old. And why was I so interested to bring her on? It had nothing to do with gender. And what it had to do with is what she said. And she said, and her name is Lisa Jaster. You guys should check her out. She's amazing. We're working on her wardrobe, but she's amazing.
We're going to link to it in the show notes to just crank those views up on the podcast.
Lisa, we're really working on your styling. Had looped in our good friend Michelle Shapiro to kind of work on that. But anyway, so don't judge her outfits. And of course, I'm busting her chops. She's a military individual. She can totally take it. She said, you know what? The reason I went through Ranger school is because I wanted to become the best officer I could.
Mm-hmm.
Had nothing to do with I'm a woman, I can do it. It's just that I wanted to be able to cultivate to be the best version of myself.
Yeah.
And that, the process sucks half the time, right? I've got 2 little kids. Some days I'm up at 4. I have a foot in my, one child's foot is in my ear. My husband's getting up at 4. And it's just like complete disaster zone.
Yes.
And then I have to get up and train and then see patients and then, get to see patients, which, sometimes I love, most of the time I love, but then there's also podcast creation. There's all these things. It is a grind. And it's not that I love the process, right? The process in and of itself, is that fun? No, but the person I get to become because of the habits and the discipline and the way in which I can manage emotional regulation and just test myself, that's awesome.
Yes.
Mm-hmm.
And that I could withstand boredom and discomfort. Cool.
It's a superpower. It's like with neutral thinking, if you're say you hate writing the show notes for your podcast, right? The positive thinker, it's like he or she is brainwashing themselves into being like, I love writing the show notes, right? Yeah. But it's like, that's not true.
Don't do that.
And then the negative thinker is like overly indexing how much you hate it. And the mind doesn't respond well to negativity. The neutral thinker is exactly what you just said. It's like, look, I want to become this person. Me doing these show notes is a gateway to becoming that person. Yeah. I just do it.
No narrative.
Yeah.
No narrative. And I would say that as the biggest thing that I've also seen about really successful people in health and wellness, within their own health and wellness, is there isn't a narrative. It's this funny thing, right? Again, I've talked to thousands of patients and the majority of them have the same 4 narrative things. Like everyone has their own BS. Mm-hmm. It's, I'm never going to lose this weight. I'm too tired. It's just so unfair. It's so much easier for everybody else. And then another person has, I'm never going to be fit enough, or no one's ever going to like me. And it's comical because you just go from human to human and they still have their own version of the same 4 narratives, right?
I love it.
The neutral thinkers, and I actually can tell you a story about another neutral thinker. It blows my mind. Neutral thinker, there's no, I don't know. It's just like, there's none of this. There's literally no talk.
Mm.
And it is something that can be cultivated over time. It doesn't have to exist. And, thinking like, well, how do you change that? Practice. Mm-hmm. If you start seeing these patterns, which we all have, if you actually took a moment to write down the absolute nonsense, you will see themes emerge. And then you can name them and you're like, this is comical. Oh, this is the, I don't know, I'm going to get diabetes narrative. Or this is the, what if I am on my way to the airport and I get struck by lightning narrative. I mean, you name it. I'm sure both of you have some impressive narrative that you say over and over again. Definitely. You don't have to tell me, but I know you have it. I know you have it. So I'm going to tell you a story about a neutral mind. Mm. Okay. I used to, and you'll appreciate this because you lived in New York City, and I guess you were in...
I was in Boston.
You were in Boston. Okay, okay. I had a large practice on Fifth Avenue, New York City, across from Central Park. Mm. Amazing, right? Amazing.
It's like best location.
Best location ever. Yeah. It's just across from the park. And I had, so in my practice, I also take care of a lot of war fighters. I sit on the medical board of SEAL Future Foundation, and I sit on the medical board for Hunter 7, which is early cancer detection. I do a lot of warfighter work. And I had Brian in my office, and Brian was at the time, a 20-year Navy SEAL. He was a breacher. Do you guys know what a breacher is?
No.
Don't they bang the doors
Totally.
down? Yeah.
Like the muscle of the team is just farm boy, probably 200 and pushing at least 250 pounds. And this is a large human.
It's like a dangerous job.
Oh, yeah. Yeah. They're the first guy in, they're busting it's it's like a knuckle dragger. Yeah. No offense, Brian. Total knuckle dragger. And he'd been, again, in the teams for 20 years, multiple deployments in some of the most dangerous places in the world, and was home on friendly soil on his motorcycle, cruising along 5 miles an hour. And a 17-year-old girl texting and driving takes him out. He lost his leg. that day. And he was sitting in my office, right? This big Texan farm boy. And I'm 5'1", I'm looking at him like, I'm going to get him. I'm the doctor that's going to really crack him open, whatever. I lean in, I'm like, Brian, how are you doing? And he looks at me like I said, where are the tampons? And he's like, doc, what do you mean? I just told you, I'm feeling really tired. I'm having some phantom limb pain. I'm like, no, how are you doing emotionally? And then I launched into this whole narrative about here he is, this big alpha guy, leader, protector of the free world. And now he is going to not be able to deploy and he's lost his leg and his life is over. So this is my narrative for him.
Totally.
And he's looking at me like, I just told you I was fine. And yeah, the box of tampons are over there. Crazy woman. And I said, no, Brian, how are you doing? And he looks at me and he goes, oh, you mean my leg? Oh, that was 6 months ago. What are you talking about? And I was like, wait, what? He's like, doc, I've moved on. We do what we have to do. What are you talking about? But don't you think it's unfair? Can you believe this? And it was just, he was completely like, no.
Wow.
And then that was another aha moment. And I read about that in my book. And I realized that most of us still haven't gotten over things from 6 years ago.
Yeah.
From our childhood or 2 years ago. We're still having some narrative that is plaguing us today. And you don't have to be an operator. And I'm sure the listener is thinking, well, I'm not a SEAL. So you can still cultivate qualities that allow you to be an asset in your own life. You do not have to lose a limb, go through X, Y, and Z to cultivate qualities of being neutral.
Yeah.
And then I call my husband and I'm like, Shane, I just saw Brian. He's like, yeah, totally. I know. He called me, he told me. I said, well, I asked him how he was doing and, I can't believe blah, blah, blah. And then it's dead silent on the other line. I'm like, hello? And he's like, honey, what are you talking about? That was like a lifetime ago. It was like lifetime ago.
Yeah.
And it was at that moment that I realized that had he had some kind of negative or positive or some crazy narrative, it would have completely caused him to backslide into any capacity of healing and probably derailed, again, maybe this is a story, but just derailed the path forward.
100%.
That's amazing.
And again, we don't have to be an operator to embody some of the attributes of what it takes to show up in our own life.
Yeah, my grandmother had this expression that was, let your grief be brief. And it's like,
love it.
Most people just want to let their grief be their entire life from then forward. And it's amazing the perspective of someone like a SEAL who gets his leg blown off and then is able to just continue to just focus on the things that he can control, which is really the power of the situation, that he does have all these other things that he still needs to take account of in his life, other than the thing that had happened to him that was obviously life-changing, but he's still in control of how that affects him going forward. I'm curious, when you asked that question, was there anything that shifted in you in terms of just how you approach your patients? Because as a doctor, I can imagine you probably felt like you needed to actually ask that question, but also how do you treat your patients in a way where you can enforce that Brian-like mentality? It's of this unwavering belief that you will get through it and that you can get through it.
You have to ask some questions. It's very ineffective to tell someone they should feel a certain way. And I have found that you cannot say, well, could you, you shouldn't be feeling that way, or how are you going to get through this? It's more like, I can give you an example of someone that recently passed away really young, and I was very, very upset. And I called my friend, and she's very good. She's she's what I would consider meditation royalty, yoga royalty, right? She is fully this Buddhist embodied, just amazing human. And she said to me, she said, wow, here I was just so upset. Again, this woman was 34 years old, couldn't believe that she died. And my friend Elena, she said, I really wonder what there is to learn from that experience. Where do you think that there is a way to leverage what you're feeling and to create action or impetus to something, to channel that energy into something productive or proactive? And I was just like, oh, yeah, maybe instead of just thinking about how upsetting this is, how could I take that kind of energy is the I don't know the right word, but the kind of like that driver, that kind of kinetic feeling to do an action. And again, so your question is, how do you communicate to patients? Probably how my friend communicated to me.
Right.
You ask a question in a way that allows them to figure it out.
Right.
And that is so much more effective.
Yeah. Do you find that like most SEALs or team guys that you've met, do they just intuitively have that neutral mindset from all the training and the combat experience that they've had? Or is there something like is your husband able to like take a civilian and kind of teach them like practical tips about like a neutral mindset?
Well, I think that he's taught me pretty well.
Yeah.
And I've asked a lot of the team guys this. Again, I think it's 50-50. I personally believe that they are born with this capacity and they are designed for war. And you guys, everyone can argue with me. That's fine. That is my personal perspective on the practice that I have and the patients that I see. And my husband will tell you that buds changed it, beat it out of him, right? That after buds, you just didn't have any kind of narrative. But again, does someone have a capacity that they are born with that can be leveraged? I think so. I really do. And there are people that would argue with me, even Rich Davini, who's amazing. He is a former SEAL, and he's wrote this amazing book called The Attributes. And he would say, right, he would say that it is nurture would trump nature. But I don't know. I'm hard pressed to believe that.
So you think that nurture plays a part, but there's also just something like intuitive in these guys. Like there is part of it is like just a God-given ability that's kind of instilled.
I do. And I think it can be cultivated. Do I think it could be cultivated to be able to go to war and do what someone is asking of potentially the operators? No, it doesn't have to be that extreme. But I will say that, a lot of, if you talk to nearly any team guy, it's not like his background was roses.
Yeah.
Right. So there's just this capacity to overcome, a way in which I believe that they are wired that we can all learn from.
I have a challenge for you, by the way.
Oh, I love challenges.
So I know you.
I love challenges.
Yeah. So you just did your first solo podcast episode.
Was it terrible? Did you listen to it?
No, it was actually amazing. And I'm not trying to bullshit you because you're on the show.
I was just like,
he's gassing you up.
So just so y'all know, on the outside, I said, okay, when I ask you about my solo cast, you have to tell me it was really good.
No, I swear to God, it was very good. Because it's all about like giving people a practical approach to eating, how you eat, how you would recommend it. I think you should do a solo episode on neutral mindset because I think it's that important for people to understand. And I feel like you could talk about it, even if it was just like 30 minutes or something. I feel like you could rip on it really naturally.
Okay. So my goal is to do more solo casts. That's what I really want to do.
Yes.
I am a very good provider, a physician, but what I want to be is a very good communicator. And that is the next trajectory. That is the next career path that I really want to take, is how can I communicate the experience, the science in a way that is applicable to the general public, right? It's not about me sounding smart, right? It's never about the person. It's about what is the value that can be provided and how can someone become better.
Yes.
Right? You don't want them to listen to the podcast and be like, oh, damn, I want my 30 minutes back.
Yeah.
I do not want that. Yeah.
Applied science is the application of it is the most important part.
Yeah. It's something Harry and I have been thinking a lot about, and I'm sure you feel this, right? Especially with the following you have. When you start to build momentum with a show and you build your network, you're like, well, I can always just bring in a new amazing guest. And it kind of takes the pressure off because you're like, well, as long as I'm asking good questions, the guest kind of does a lot of the work for you, and people will just think it's a great episode. It's a whole other skill set to be able to sit in front of a camera or a microphone and be like, I'm going to talk long form on a topic for 30, 45 minutes. It's something that we've been actually challenging ourselves to do because, to your point, it's like at a minimum, if you want to become a better communicator, I couldn't think of a better way to be able to like eloquently and succinctly state what you believe over a solo podcast. But I do think for you, it's like you have so much information that's like just so innate to you that you're probably like, would anyone really find this valuable? And what we're always amazed by is like the basics that are trapped in your head are so valuable for so many people.
I'm going to do it. And then if it sucks, you guys heard it here first. So if it doesn't get any downloads, thanks guys.
Yeah.
I have a question. So how do you teach neutral thinking to your children? Like how do you think about doing that in a way that they can relate to over time?
Yeah, well, we do a number of things. I'm very aware that so my kids, for the listener, they are 2, little over 2 and 4. And my son's name is Leonidas Michael.
What a strong name.
And my daughter's name is Aries Hunter.
Wow.
Total wallflowers, as you can imagine. The children, yes,
You can
total.
just see them like running around the playground with swords and just conquering.
Yeah.
Yeah, I'm just like, guys, just not really, just very little. We do a handful of things. Number one, there are things that we ask them to say every day. Are you ready? I am strong. I am kind. I am courageous. I am worthy. And I am loved. And it is amazing to see a little over 2-year-old say those things and brainwash them to be comfortable within their own body. My goal for my children is to not have them be looking outward, but to be looking inward. And to know that they have the capacity to manage, to mitigate, to exist in this world from a framework where they are comfortable. And I'm not saying comfortable as in easy. I mean comfortable to be able to uphold their values and to not be swayed by the external world, to be able to uphold their positioning, right? Where they can be challenged by other people, by things, and still be able to rise to the occasion. How do I teach neutral thinking to a 4-year-old? Well, it's very challenging. I'm still trying to get one kid to stop peeing on the wall and then the other kid to, whatever. But what you're asking is very important. And the question is, when the kids kind of come up to some resistance, right? There's lots of fits that they're throwing. Never in that moment do I try to course correct. They're young. Prefrontal cortex is not formed. In a moment of stress is not where anything is happening. So I let them be okay with it. I don't also try to take that stress and frustration away. I want to see them work through that. Basically, I get down on their level and I just say, I'm here. It's okay. How are you feeling? It's okay to be angry. It's okay to have all these feelings. It doesn't matter. My daughter yesterday was throwing an absolute tantrum. Do you want to go to the right? Mommy, I want to go to the right side. Okay, let's go to the right. No, and then, it's like the crazy girlfriend that you're constantly doing the things to make it better. And they're still just throwing it. Nothing is ever good enough.
Yes.
All right. So it was just, you said yes way too fast.
I had a couple exes that
you said, Harry, tell me, did he say way too fast?
Way too aggressive.
Yeah, that was a way too aggressive yes. Way too of an aggressive yes. So never in the moment. It's never in the moment. It's afterwards when things have calmed down. It's later in that day. At the end of the evening, I always say, okay, well, what went well today? Oh, it was so cool. Like I colored, I did taekwondo, but what didn't go well? How do you think that you behaved? What is a different way that potentially you could have responded? I don't actually talk to them like kids. I try to use small words, but I want them to build resilience. And so that's how we work on kind of mitigating this extreme of emotions, is not necessarily when they are young to mitigate the neutral mind, but to allow them to have the capacity to experience and deal with their frustration and know that that's okay.
It's almost like through the questions you're asking, you're getting them to like actually reflect on their entire day and think about things that they could have done better at a really young age. And I would think too, what's so interesting about your background is like you spent all this time with these older patients, people that probably, are on death's door feeling like they have mental issues or demons or things that they never course corrected. So I would have to imagine as a mom knowing what you know, like the ability to give your kids the ability to like own their own mind and have mental mastery. Like,
Yes.
could there be a better gift to give to your
No.
child?
And I think it's really important to have lots of conversation, because it's amazing that we all communicate. You know, we speak words, but I'm saying one word, you might be hearing something else. I'm saying something else, and Harry is hearing fried chicken.
Yeah.
No offense.
Which he actually is. Though.
How did
He's
you
like
know?
chicken and waffles,
fried
chicken
chicken.
and waffles. Where's my chicken and waffles? And so I always want to have these lines of communication, because I want to know how they're processing things. And I look back on my own childhood, and my mom was very strict. It didn't matter. I did whatever I wanted. I was pretty much a maniac child. And so was my husband. It didn't really matter how strict she was and how much she yelled. And I love my mom. We're really close. But I internalized it as a very kind of amped up environment.
Mm-hmm.
But it wasn't.
Yeah.
It was my interpretation. So knowing that when we have lines of communication, and I can talk to my daughter and say, you know, like, where is this feeling? How are you know, what are you thinking? Tell me more.
Mm-hmm.
Then I can course correct the way in which she's processing things
Yeah.
to a more empowering way, as opposed to have it be on autopilot. How do we take it out of autopilot when they are very young?
Yes.
I think it's really important.
So good.
Yeah.
I can't help but think that the way that you've kind of framed this whole idea of the way you're teaching this neutral thinking to your kids could be a really great place for a lot of people to start with their own transformation, their own rebirth, whether it's just saying those 5 things that you tell your kids to say, or just checking in beginning of the day, end of the day.
Yeah.
Like, they are things you teach to your kids, but a lot of times we like lose sight of that, and we get lost in our own emotions and our own way of interpreting things, as you said, and then it becomes more of a complicated puzzle. So even for adults, it's like, start with this stuff, because it will teach you how to love yourself and process through some of this.
I love that. And also take stock. Be aware of what you're thinking. Do you guys know Mark Divine?
Yes.
Okay. So Mark is a very good friend. In fact, he introduced myself and my husband.
Oh, are you serious?
Yeah. And my husband has known him for years before Buds. And I said, Mark, you know, I interviewed him for my podcast, one of my first interviews, because he's been a friend and a mentor for just many, many years. And I said, so Mark, what do you think about in the downtime, right? So after this podcast, I'm going to go, maybe we'll go see one of our friends, or Angela, or, you know, whoever. And I will get up here, and there will probably be thoughts on the way to pick up my gear, which I'm hoping is still there. And then I'll have more thoughts as I go to the bathroom, and then more thoughts here. And all of that is probably going to be unconscious. And so I asked Mark, I said, Mark, and that's what I would call white space, right? We're not actively, I said, Mark, so what do you think about in that white space? And he looks at me like, what? I'm like, yeah, you know, like the time where you're showering or you're doing all this stuff. He's like, nothing. Or whatever I choose. And so it's amazing.
Yeah.
How empowering is that to realize you actually can get control over those thoughts?
But you have to take stock. And the only way, so he obviously has developed himself over time, where he's a long-time meditator, but how do we become more aware of the mental vomit in our mind all the time? A way to do that is to write it down, take stock, be aware. It's not on autopilot anymore.
Right.
And then once it becomes off autopilot, then you can do something about it.
Definitely.
Yeah.
I hate to do this. I feel like we could talk for 2 more hours, but our producer's going to kick us out of here.
Jose, how does my hair look?
Looks fabulous.
I don't even see Jose. Jose's in big trouble.
Where'd he go?
Jose's MIA right now.
Oh, and he's probably going to come back and say, you know what? I forgot to hit record.
Yeah.
Dude, you are fired. No.
We're waiting for that day, or we're not waiting for that day to happen. It hasn't happened yet. So
Yeah, but we're honored to have you in studio. Like I said, we've consumed your content for a long time. It's always really cool to go from, kind of following someone on social media to then being able to build a relationship. And, we thought it was going to be a really heavy nutrition focused podcast. And I feel like we left learning more about just mindset and things that I think maybe you haven't spoken too much publicly about, but you should do way more.
Oh, yeah.
So you have the challenge now. So we'll see if you do it.
Yeah,
I think
I'll do
you're
it.
going to crush it.
I'll do it.
But we just appreciate you so much. And for the listener, if you could just give people just some insight into how they could connect with you. I know your book's coming out soon. So that'd be
so
great.
the book Forever Strong is very unique. And there hasn't been a book written like this, because it is nutritional science. It's nutrition history. It tells you exactly what to eat, how to design a program. It has fitness. It really shifts the framework to muscle as this organ of longevity. And it has all my experience of the thousands of patients, the key mental framework components that will allow people to take immediate action. And that's what gets lost in translation. I can give you the perfect plan, but if you don't have the framework to recreate an architecture and a way of thinking about it and doing it, doesn't matter. Many people have 50 nutrition books on their shelf. This book has it all wrapped up, and it also even addresses the lens at which we view nutrition information through, which is not, we never just have a nutrition conversation nowadays.
Totally.
It's nutrition, it's politics, it's morality. And this book really lays it out there. So they can check out Forever Strong. You can find it on my website. You can find it on Amazon. You can find it at your bookseller. You can go to my podcast, The Dr. Gabrielle Lyon Show. I'm very active on Instagram. If you see those reels, it is not because I wanted to make those reels, is because I have an IG team that knows me very well. And, you know, my best friend actually has this group called Capture Social, and she knows me so well. She makes me do these absolutely ridiculous things. So thanks a lot, Teresa T. Pasquale.
Did I see you recording one on the street today before?
Yes. So terrible. So
sounded
terrible.
Great though.
Yeah. And then I have a great newsletter, which we put evidence-based information in. And I am going to be having a live event, which you guys better come to.
We will be
January,
there.
right?
January 13th and
Let's go.
14th here in Austin. Can't wait.
We're there.
And we'll be at the HPLT speaker event November 11th at Squatch together
So
too,
awesome.
which would be great.
So you'll get to meet Leo and Aries, and my husband will be there, Shane.
Nice.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Do you think he'd be a good podcast guest? Would he want to come on the show?
He would be a profound guest. Would he want to do it? I don't know. I mean, he's a pretty humble, capable human. He's incredibly unique. He would be a great person to interview.
Does he have the time?
Yeah.
It sounds like he is a busy man.
Well, he only works 100 hours a week, so he would tell you he's got some time.
Yeah. Well, we can't wait to meet him.
Yeah.
And it's awesome to meet you too.
Yeah,
so thank
thanks
you
for
so
having
much for
me.
doing
Thank
this,
you so
Gabrielle.
much.
Thank you.
This is great.
Yeah.
Thank you.
Cool.